This is a trial on an interesting thing that I think is true. And I'm actually a Ph.D. in psychology who came out of a psychology department with a very strong clinical psychology component. And we were within walking distance to the state of Virginia's Happy Farm, where the really crazy people were kept. In the 5 years it took me to get my PhD, I would wind up going over to the Virginia facility for various reasons, odd reasons, but reasons nevertheless. Wherefore, I'll just give you a clinical psychologist. My expertise was in verbal learning and memory, organization of memory. A clinical psychologist would ask me to come over with her or him to the facility and we would meet somebody. And so I learned what these crazy people were like. When I first encountered Trump, he was recognizably a sociopath. I recognized that he was dyslexic almost immediately because I'm a real serious world expert in just what goes wrong with the brain that makes it hard for people to read. And he was clearly a narcissist. That was easy to see. The sociopath was confirmed. And then there's this schizoid aspect of it. He's not what they call a schizophrenic. He's a schizoid personality. But I met a lot of these crazy people. And I learned how to identify them because we had back then a pretty standard nomenclature. It's not like the modern nomenclature that is volumes and hundreds of syndromes. There were some basic syndromes, and they've all held up over the years. But the sort of simple way of thinking about abnormal personalities is passé. They use these more careful diagnostic tools that they've used and so forth and so on. So what this trial is about is my original reaction around the time that I decided that Trump was not a sociopath, he was a psychopath. He was a murderous sociopath. And so I wrote this article. In writing the article, I tried to keep it very brief because I was really responding to this one question and I think this person was running for Congress in Texas. And she wondered what was wrong with Trump. And what I did was I said, I can tell you top of my head, he's so standard. This is like not a surprising person. There's very little about him novel. There are lots of examples of him, particularly throughout history and so forth and so on. And I met people like him in the funny farm that have been put away permanently. Originally, after I'd seen this, I went on Twitter and I said, this guy's a dyslexic, narcissistic, schizoid psychopath. Really short, which is he's got a wiring problem with reading. So his type of dyslexia is a wiring problem. It never goes away. He couldn't read or write when he was 6. He can't read or write today. He can barely do it. He can go very slow. He can do a few words, but he can't comprehend what he's reading because he can't read the words. He only cares about himself, and there's reasons for that. These are all learned. So, by the way, sociopaths and psychopaths are a class of abnormal personality that is not genetic. It's learned. So typically it has to do with how you were raised. And the problem is that every kid tests out lying as they grow up. And the proper response to lying is you can't do that. If a kid learns year after year that lying gets what he wants and nobody deters him, he will become a sociopath. There's a pretty high likelihood of it. And if he turns murderous, in other words, he doesn't care enough about anybody to care whether they get killed, he becomes a psychopath. Sociopathy, it's mainly learned. There's some probable DNA tendencies, but it's nothing like schizophrenia is, for example, inherited, the serious schizophrenics. But sociopaths and psychopaths is largely learned. And what's known is it's incurable because they learned it so well. It works so well for them that they can't be talked out of it. And they get really skilled at it, which is what with Trump. Not only can it never be cured, it's also known in just pretty much every case that it only gets worse. The longer they're free in society to engage in the sorts of things that they engage in, usually to get power, it becomes more incurable. It gets more outrageous, which is what we see with. I wrote this little paragraph here where I give you when I first started going over to the university, I had this kind of reaction, which is I'd be introduced to somebody, talk to them about random things, and it was just like a normal conversation. You're just a regular person. There seemed to be nothing wrong, and except for what they did, which is typically why they were in the happy house. So you learned how to ask the right questions to see what they were doing. But you don't have to Trump was not one of these that you had to have special sessions with. As a psychologist, he was just plain identifiable patently for what he was just normally doing. There was a video that he was on that is actually the day that I decided this guy's no sociopath, this guy's a psychopath. And this may seem strange, but this was the event that convinced me that I was staring at a psychopath. And so I'm going to play this to y'all.
Taking his questionable rhetoric to new heights, President Trump talked about himself in biblical terms. At one point, looking to the sky as he praised his handling of the economy as godlike.
I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it. So I'm taking on China. I'm taking on China on trade. And you know what? We're winning.
The president stirred up more outrage, repeating his belief that Jewish Americans face a loyalty test in the upcoming election.
If you vote for a Democrat, you're very disloyal to Israel and to the Jewish people.
After some Jewish American groups slammed that remark as anti-Semitic, the president accepted the support of conservative commentator.
So the severely crazy people, it was not uncommon to find one of them telling you they were chosen by God and all these other people were evil and so forth and so on. But you'd have to get it in context to see it. But this was a good case where I went from almost a psychopath to psychopath. So this is the trial, and I realize I'm an expert, so I have no idea what people are going to think about this. And so it's going to be interesting to see what people think. For me, it is the truth. I said the abnormal psychology terminology is not current, but it's still correct. Is the whole truth? I said yes, to my mind. There's another term that's been used on Trump, which is called a malignant. It's called a malignant narcissist. And by malignant, they mean that he's a narcissist that is malignant in the sense that he forces other people to believe in his own narcissism, which is his threats. You won't get elected unless you praise him type thing. What I was describing didn't say he's a malignant narcissist. And the people who say he's a malignant narcissist are right. In some sense, they're more highly descriptive than I was. But
I think the old meaning of malignant is rotten wood.
yeah. What these guys mean by malignant is he threatens you. He uses threats that he puts fear in you to the degree that you tell him that he's the greatest person on the face of the earth, or he was chosen by God. But rotten wood is good. That's an interesting point. Is it nothing but the truth? I said, yes. This was so clear. And by the way, since it's incurable, typically psychologists will say, we've got to meet with the guy. What they're doing is it's money. Okay. But if if they know the person is incurable, they're not going to make any money. And so they say, I'll have to meet him personally. And at this level, he's just obviously what I've described him as. And this is in my background, obviously. I don't really know of any people that are experts this has been around since 2020. And I've not had anybody who was an expert say he's wrong, and nor have I seen it on the web. Because I'm pretty sure that anybody who really knows what I'm talking about agrees pretty much. Again, they'll come back and say, you haven't really perfectly described it. What's the deceit? I said there's no deceit because I simply believe there's no deceit. And the deceit or truth intended, the truth is intended. What's the motivation behind the truth or lie? I was just at the time trying to be informative to tell people what a regular old psychologist who studied natural language of human beings and memory and how the two things are used to lie and stuff, just looked at him and said, yeah, this is what it is. What's the social acceptability of the truth or lie? Again, given my background, I believe I'm telling the truth. I don't think there's any real question about it. He's an abnormal personality. What the law says and all this other stuff, I have no idea. That if somebody were to ask me to testify and say, does this guy know the difference between right and wrong? Yeah, every sociopath and psychopath, by definition, knows the difference between right and wrong. They learn it, and they learn that wrong is okay. Once you learn that wrong is okay and it gets you what you want, and nobody deters you from it, and you do it enough times, and you do it for a while as you're growing up, it doesn't come out of you. It doesn't stop because you learned how to do it, and you learned how to do it well. What's the label that improve? I said, just this is true. And so what I'd like to do is go through the juror, basically get everybody to give me a 20 to 30 second summary of their verdict, and then we can discuss it. Juror one.
Good evening, Bob. Good evening, everyone. To give my views or my summary, I would have to say that on this case, Bob, I would have to disagree with you. In my opinion, I believe Trump does not suffer from any psychological disorders. I just feel like he's a completely misunderstood individual who sometimes purposely says things in a controversial manner to rub others the wrong way. I personally believe he's a highly intelligent and shrewd businessman with a strong vision and ambition to restore America. Rather than being mentally ill, I see him as a determined leader who wants the best for the American people and is acting out of patriotism and conviction, not a disorder. Thank you.
That is just so you know, my twin brother has that view. Just to amuse you.
Oh my God, you have a twin brother.
Yeah. Having said that, he is a extremely honest, extremely integritous person in all of his affairs. But he does have the view that Juror One was describing. And he and I, we grew up together and we're twins, and so we don't have any, we don't hate each other. Juror Two.
Just to put out there, I'm also a twin. So that's a fun thing. So I agree with what you said, Rob. I think some of the things that he says are just bang out of order. And even though I am from South Africa, I agree with what you've been saying in terms of the whole psychopath thing. So yeah, I agree. I don't agree with these worldly views, but sometimes it just rubs a person the wrong way.
Yeah. 3.
Hi everyone, I do agree with you too, Rob. What I'm noticing a lot though when I watch like Trump things on TikTok, I just see an old man with a lot of money that's just bored. That's what I'm watching every time I see that.
Period.
So that's a really interesting thing. So I've known people who are very rich and who are bored, and it's really interesting to see them. Some of them have some of the Trump's characteristics. And I can't mention their names because the ones that I want to mention, they're still alive, but they are bored. And so they wind up doing sort of crazy things. One of them, for example, owns a horse farm in Florida, and he races horses. But in business, he's a very nasty person. But he's basically bored raising horses. If you're very rich, is evidently he's not a horse lover. He's a lover of racing horses. So juror 4.
Good evening, everyone. I don't agree. I agree with some of the stuff you say, but is it the truth? I said I don't know. I come from South Africa, and unfortunately, our presidents are corrupt. Lots of corruption in our country. And by the actions, one can already tell that Trump does what he feels best and does not take the country into consideration, placing tariffs or whatever he feels. I don't know, however, if I would be as harsh as to label him a psychopath. But then again, I don't have the knowledge and degree to determine and diagnose him. But in saying that, I also have to add that one can see that he's definitely not what we would call in the norm. So yes, he's different, but some of the tariffs and stuff that he's placing, even on South Africa, I think it's putting our presidency into shock. But whether he's a psychopath, I don't agree with that though. I wouldn't be the one that can diagnose him, but I wouldn't go that far.
I would suspect that I would be taking a position like yours, except for my education. So because of my background, one of the things that was said earlier here, which I was trying not to say because I didn't mean it that way, was Trump is a type of what's called abnormal personality. He's not, and he is technically insane, but he's not really insane. So, for example, when I said that he knows the difference between right and wrong, there are people who don't know the difference between right and wrong, and they are truly insane. They really don't get it. It's an abnormal condition, but it's not something you put somebody away for unless he is given a position of power. He has to be put away for some reason because he killed a bunch of people. So some of the people that I would deal with in the Virginia facility had murdered like 6 people or a family or 2 families or things like that, just to get back at somebody, this kind of stuff, just to punish somebody else who was still alive. This crazy stuff. And they had no idea what right and wrong was. They really didn't. Juror 5.
Good evening, everyone. As you'll see by my answers, I don't completely agree with Rob on this because I almost see Trump as someone who acts firmly, I would put in brackets, like a Papa Bear figure, trying to protect his own and do what he believes is right. It might not necessarily be what is right, but what he believes is right. Now, I'm not a professional who can make a diagnosis, but from my own perspective, I don't agree with what's being stated. And as we've learned, professionals aren't always right. No offense, Rob, but professionals aren't always right. So just because it is your field of expertise doesn't mean I necessarily have to nod and he is a psychopath. I believe that he does act with best intent, even if his decisions don't always align with outsiders' logic. And sometimes these decisions have even been beneficial for us as South Africans. I'm a South African, and I believe some of the stuff that he's brought awareness to has opened the eyes of other countries to what's actually happening in South Africa. So depending on who you ask in South Africa, they might tell you that what he's doing is very beneficial for us.
Yeah.
I don't think he's selfish. I just don't think he always follows outsider logic and tends to act on what he thinks is best.
Yeah. Juror 6.
Hey there, how is everyone? Well, I guess everyone's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to say hi, Bob.
Hi.
A great speech about psychology and psychosis. I didn't really know the difference. But yeah, so getting along with the Trump thing, I've been around for some time, so I do have memories of Trump, like the years and the history of it. In the beginning, I remember him from the business show. What was it? Some business series that he
I
had.
forgot the name of the series myself. I can't remember the name either. Yeah,
But
it was
anyway,
very famous. Yeah. I'm sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, I suddenly went over my head. I
The
said
Apprentice.
that's
The
the
Apprentice.
catchphrase, not the name of the show. Yeah.
I knew of Trump back in the 80s and the early 90s when he was going through all those bankruptcies. I didn't have him diagnosed. I had him. I didn't really know him, but I taught at the right side. I actually lived in Manhattan for about a year, and I knew of Trump, but he was just a rich kid to me. I didn't know.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
For a long time in England, news would filter across, and he just seemed ridiculous.
When I saw him in action, that's when I started realizing what I was staring at. So you could call him a narcissist. You could always, if you'd asked me in 1980, is he a narcissist? I would have said yes.
Okay.
But I wouldn't have gone much further than that. And then I recognized a long time ago that he was dyslexic, because you can easily detect it. Once you learn and you appreciate dyslexia, it's a hard thing to really appreciate, because everybody is a little bit. The best way to describe dyslexia is everybody is dyslexic. Exactly how, when, and where. Okay. And
dyslexia rules KO.
Yeah, that's right. But some people are severely dyslexic. He's severely dyslexic. And the way you usually recognize it is how he covers for it. And so he has this affinity and pretending to read. So he'll read a sentence out of a page, and you'll see it. You'll watch him as he's having trouble doing it. And you know that he only listens to people. Other people read the things and tell him what the thing said. And because he can't read it himself. He just can't.
That's what I was actually going to mention. Like with him being in that role, he obviously has to listen to everybody and he has to make his own decisions. And I don't know what his decisions are on most of the topics or what they have to do, but like everybody makes poor decisions at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Some are good ideas that people have and are genuine, but like also the other thing is that gets into factor. Okay, Trump as he is, but he also has to deal with other agencies. He has to deal with other members. He has to deal with Parliament. I don't know what you guys deal with there, but he's involved in a lot of things. So I'm sure if you delve deep enough into the rabbit hole, yeah, it's just a very long, dark, deep place.
Yeah.
So person's behaviors on those circumstances could be detrimental to civilization, like to be honest.
Yeah, to me, he's extremely dangerous. And
I was actually also informed, because what I was going to say is I was actually a biggish fan of him, like back in the days when I didn't really know him. I was a kid. But like I do have also some friends in the US, and they've been telling me that the things that he's doing there right now, it's just unspeakable. I don't know if it's true, but apparently he signed some sort of bill or legislature or whatever they call it into like favor where he can actually ban currency and just let everybody advance to like crypto. So I don't know how true that is. TikTok sometimes can also be misleading, so I'm not really entirely sure.
Yeah, I have a trial coming up It's called Flashy Crypto, which gets a lot into this and how if all cash goes digital, in other words, there's no cash money, there's no printed money.
But that wouldn't be the first time that we actually go through that cycle. First, people used to barter. Second, I think then they introduced coinage, and then coinage turned into notes, and then notes turned into cards, and then cards turned into digital EFTs. And so there is a process, there is a cycle. So it could come into factor, it could come into play.
So when I'll try to do the thing.
I've just sat through a whole day of blackout, a European blackout, in which your digital currency is useless. You can't get it. You can't get at it. There needs to be some kind of backup to all of this.
Yeah, you'll like when I do the thing on Flashy Crypto, which should be, I think, in late May or something. It actually goes into how it should be done. It was invited at the Flash Memory Conference a year or 2 years ago. I gave an invited keynote address, and this paper is all about that. And it's about how crypto should be done as opposed to how it is done.
Good evening, Rob. Rob, I agreed with everything you said. Find the case very interesting. But I have a small summary that I made. Trump is actually a pretty typical abnormal personality. He only cares about himself. He does not live in our reality. And he has murderous lack of empathy that never ceases. Yes, that's my small summary.
What I said, yes, and I agree. I'm 100% with that because I basically said the same thing. Juror 8.
Greetings, everyone. Just to give us a brief summary, I said while some traits, particularly narcissism, align with widely observed behavior, there's no formal diagnosis to support the rest, making the claim only partially true. The statement exaggerates for effect, likely motivated by genuine moral concern rather than deliberate deceit. Its accessibility varies by audience. Acceptability varies by audience. It resonates with critics, but is ethically questionable in a professional context. A more socially reasonable framing would describe his behavior as consistent with narcissistic and antisocial traits rather than issuing unverified diagnosis. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the only disagreement I have is that my diagnosis is verified, and I try to explain why. There are lots of situations where there are lots of types of abnormal personalities. So, for example, in certain forms of schizophrenia, in certain forms of depression disorders, and so forth and so on, you really can't verify much of anything without actually having multiple sessions with the people to tease apart what's going on. And we're a long way. We've got these much better diagnostic, I think it's called M2 or M1 diagnostic tools that are that reflect vastly more detail. But in the case of the diagnosis that I'm making, which is only as good as as y'all have said, is only as good as I can tell you, and then you're free to believe me or not. I don't feel like anything that I've said isn't as plain as the nose on your face. To me, it was just, okay, I got it. So this sounds really good. Are there any other comments that people would like to make on this?
Thank you. I've actually had a good time.
Yeah, good. So yeah, I have too. So this is the first time that I've ever put this out in a context where I've opened myself to criticism in the sense of hearing other people's points of view. Prior to this time, it's always was just this article that I'd written and so forth and so on. So what I'm hearing is fantastic. So this sounds great. So we'll see y'all in the future and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Everybody.
Yep. See y'all.
Good times.